Hey y'all, so this is a topic I frankly have no idea how I haven't gotten to yet, but I guess now I am: the problem of evil. This is one of my all-time favorite things to discuss, and I think it's actually one of the stronger, logical arguments against Christianity. I want to note before going into this that while a lot of my videos focus on religion as a whole, or at least a more broad spectrum of them, this is very specifically an argument used to counter Christianity. It is applicable to some other religions if they meet all the same criteria, but I'll be discussing this in a way that is primarily and pretty much exclusively aimed towards Christianity because it is most commonly discussed with Christians. So let's just get into the video. The problem of evil is a philosophical question that challenges the idea of a tri-omni God through reasoning. A tri-omni God refers to a God who is omnipotent, omnibenevolent, and omniscient. Or in other words, all-powerful, all-loving, and all-knowing. The problem generally goes through these lines of reasoning. Evil exists. God is all-loving, so he would want to stop the evil. God is all-knowing, so he is aware that the evil is happening. God is all-powerful, so he is capable of preventing the evil. Evil still exists, therefore a tri-omni God does not. This video will be going over the slew of answers this question receives from Christians, which are often called Theodicies. Some of these I find more compelling than others, frankly. The first response you'll hear to the problem of evil in the vast majority of cases is free will. Evil and suffering exist because God gave us free will, so we are able to commit evil acts, and for him to stop us would be preventing us from exercising that free will. I have, well, a lot of things to say about this response, as it's both the most frequent and, in my opinion, the weakest. This argument is made with the defense of a tri-omni God, which implies God is all-knowing. If God is all-knowing, how do we have free will? He is aware of what actions we will take before creating us and always has been. This kinda just sounds like determinism with a bow on it. If God knows what actions we will commit, are they not predetermined? I guess it sort of reminds me of the "can God create a rock so heavy he can't lift it" thing. We have free will, so what we do is our choice, but it also must be predetermined, as God is aware of what choices we will make before they happen. There is also the issue of non-human caused suffering, natural disasters, disease, etc. How does free will account for a tsunami or childhood cancer? Aside from that, however, I think that there's two bigger issues here. One, why does free will necessitate that evil acts will occur? And two, if free will does necessitate evil, why is free will good? If God is all-powerful, why would he not be able to create beings who have the capacity for evil, who are still fully physically capable of committing it, and he would not stop them, but simply don't desire to do so? Could God not create creatures who were so viscerally disgusted by the act of harming others that they would never choose to do it, even if they're still fully capable of making that choice? If that were not possible, and free will does necessitate evil, why does that make free will a good thing or make God good for giving us it? Why is free will the superior option to God stepping in and stopping these evil acts from happening, or from killing the people who would commit them before they do? Free will doesn't really explain the problem of evil. It doesn't explain natural suffering from disaster or disease, it does not explain why a good God would create beings capable of evil, and it does not explain why free will necessitates evil. A lot of people like to come in at this point and go, well, he did actually, but the devil sways people. But, I mean, again, that doesn't really account for natural evil. If God is all-powerful, why doesn't he just kill the devil also? Lock him up, prevent him from doing what he's doing? The devil is technically an angel, so he's not subject to the same hands-off they got free will shit that God does with humans. And even if he were, would a good God, again, not see killing one to prevent the suffering of millennia of humans as more of a kind deed than just going, no, free will's good, I can't stop anyone? The answer of free will doesn't solve the problem, it just creates more questions. There's quite a few other answers past this point, one of which is that these things just need to happen. There's usually a variety of reasonings for this, one of which I will be getting to later, but the ones here tend to range from, God works in mysterious ways, he's above our understanding, which is, well, a cop-out, and I don't think I need to address that frankly because it's not a real argument, but also some variation of it causes people to turn to God or strengthens their faith. Putting aside how horribly insensitive sentiments like that can be, this brings up a couple questions. Why is God not able to achieve this through joyous acts? He created us, and the world, supposedly, meaning he created the conditions that cause suffering to result in people turning to him. Why did he not do this through positive means? People experience a miracle, or even just ingraining this response in us in a way that he did for suffering, but instead for positive experiences. God is supposedly all-powerful. Would he rather not us love him and turn to him because we're happy instead of because we're suffering? This is often described as a sort of test of faith type thing, a Job situation if you will. Will you still follow me if you have nothing? But frankly, I think God basically hiring Satan as a contract killer on Job's family and taking his whole livelihood away to test him doesn't really sound like a loving God. It sounds a bit more like a celestial abusive partner who love bombs you and then berates you, but maybe that's just me. Point being, aside from honestly me being very interested in the Book of Job as a representation of God's character, is that the Holy Book doesn't really align with this claim that God is all-loving. Sure, God could have people turn to him through positive experiences if he's tri-omni, and sure, God could even just enjoy people being happy because he's loving and not because he needs worship, but instead, God supposedly inflicts suffering on people, or at least allows it to happen for personal gain. It makes the "it's a test of faith" answer sound a lot more like God isn't actually all-loving, while also refusing to admit as such. It sounds a lot more like denial than a real argument. Coming off of that, however, some people argue that the God of the Bible isn't tri-omni. Instead of trying to argue how evil can actually coexist with a tri-omni God, they simply say, well, God does exist, but it's not an issue because he's not tri-omni. Frankly, I like this answer. While I still think that God doesn't exist at all, this response seems to often come from people who are both actually familiar with the Bible and who are much more knowledgeable about their faith than simply grasping at straws to defend the ideas of God they've built off the back of indoctrination instead of from a genuine interest and understanding of their own religion. I think that this is more coming from the actual content of God's character and actions instead of from verses either taken out of context or that contradict the way God actually behaves throughout the rest of the text. While the Bible does specifically describe God as all-powerful, though vaguely through the term almighty, it never directly describes God as all-loving. The phrase God is love is used, along with stating various other things that God does love, such as the world and other more general things. However, theological discussions surrounding these verses have made it pretty clear that this was not intended to imply that God is all-loving, but rather a variation of things such as feeling love or practicing love is an act of worship, that God is forgiving, or that God has a higher capacity for love, along with a variety of other things. The Bible does directly describe the things God hates also, such as lying or killing innocents. A being that's all-loving would not have the capacity for hate, and as God is never really described as all-loving, but more so just very loving, and that love can be an act of worship, there's a pretty solid reason to believe this not to be the case. God is also described with various negative adjectives, such as jealous and vengeful, and many actions he takes throughout the Bible are not loving but rather self-serving, such as, again, all of Job, the flood, turning Lot's wife into salt, and the long list of people he's killed for minor infractions. And while I think this may be a rather contested take on the list of shitty things God has done, I think the need God has for worship is one that's maybe not exactly evil, but definitely not a positive character trait, if you will. In regards to being all-knowing, God is directly and repeatedly described as all-knowing. However, a very big theological debate since, well, pretty much the beginning of the religion, has been if God knew that Satan would rebel and if he knew original sin would occur. This is never directly answered through the text, though there are many verses stating he is all-knowing. The general answer to this seems to be, yes he did, but why is above our understanding. Though I personally think this question can be answered through the simple fact that we've ruled out God being all-loving. My main issue with this response comes to play, however, with the fact that, well, why would you worship a god like this? I stated this in another video, but I really don't think the God of the Bible is one worth worshipping. Even if I fully believed he were real and it was proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, I would believe in him but never worship a god who demanded my worship at all, let alone one who behaves in the way God is described to. I guess this response really comes down to the fact that I think it's a pretty valid response to the problem of evil, but one that makes your god look like someone who probably needs jail time instead of a swath of devoted followers. Another argument I hear often is that of contrast. Good can't exist without evil. We enjoy a good meal more when we haven't eaten all day, or a warm fire more after shoveling snow. We know the joy of the good because it contrasts with the bad. In pretty much any other argument, I'd see this as a pretty good reason, but again, this kind of comes back to the same issue as why does free will necessitate evil? God created us, and therefore our understanding of the world and the world itself, supposedly. Why did God create us in a way that we can only enjoy and understand good with a contrast to evil? This argument is one that's very evidently not of some divine origin, but one of the ways that we can see, well, yeah, humans definitely invented this belief system. This is the only way we can conceptualize things being, and after the fact we made up an explanation for it. Again, it's pretty much the same issue as free will. It is this way, but if God is tri-omni, he's both capable of and would want to create a better world where this is not the case. I'll just kind of leave this one here. It really is just the same issue as the free will problem. God could have made us in a way where this was not the case, but he didn't. Why would a good God do that? The final point I want to address is kind of coming back to the things need to be this way argument, specifically addressing the soul-making theodicy. This line of reasoning is generally that God has a good reason for allowing evil to exist, that he didn't create us to live perfect lives, but rather to grow. Essentially, he intentionally creates us incomplete so that we can grow as people in our experiences, and to do that we must experience bad things to essentially round us out or improve our character. Essentially, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger type argument. My problem with this comes down to a more specific version of the problem of evil. What we've been discussing for the most part is the logical problem of evil, how to reconcile the existence of evil with a triomni God. As discussed throughout the rest of the video, there are a lot of reasons people believe God would choose to create evil, that free will is worth the suffering, that good can't exist without evil, or to test our faith. However, with the soul-making theodicy, the problem of evil becomes that of the evidential problem of evil. Maybe God had to allow evil for whatever reason, but why is there so much of it? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger isn't really an applicable mindset when it often does kill you. What benefit or character is created by a destructive hurricane, an infant with cancer, or a genocide? If this were the case, why would a loving God not introduce the bare minimum amount of evil instead of evil that's not equally present with any type of good? What type of action or amount of character growth is strong enough to counteract the horrors of a genocide, rape and child abuse, or suicide cults? The reason this is called the evidential problem of evil is that it's evident many evil and destructive events don't actually cause people to grow into stronger and more faithful people, but simply kills them, causes lifelong trauma, or results in a cycle of abuse creating more trauma. It's also evident that the kind of good that would be remotely equivalent to the impact of a genocide or a hurricane is nearly, if not fully, impossible to find. There is one brief final argument I want to address, but it's a short one as I feel like it's another cop-out answer very similar to God works in mysterious ways. This is the argument that God embodies good and created the concept of good, therefore anything God does is definitionally good. I really think that this is just a non-answer, frankly, and it requires you to admit that genocide, rape, and murder are all actually good things. It doesn't present any answers to the question, but is more similar to, God is above our understanding, but he is good, so whatever he chooses for us is good than anything, which is really just a, I don't want to think about that type response that also manifests in a lot of insensitive and honestly cruel statements to people going through hard situations. Basically, it's an insensitive and non-answer. Overall, I feel like the only real solid answer to the problem of evil is that God is not triomni, specifically in that he's not all-loving. But this answer really necessitates that your God is a person unworthy of worship, that he's not a good God. The problem of evil is a long-running debate, and I've by no means covered everything there is to discuss about it, but it's one that I personally find very compelling. Usually I'm not a fan of logical arguments, as they only really prove things in our brain as opposed to through anything quantifiable. However, I feel like this one is a bit of an exception to that, at least in the sense that it's worth discussing. If you like this video and want to support me, please consider subscribing and checking out my affiliate links in the description. Thanks for watching, guys. Ha det.
The children think too much, they've hardly a fear of God, always asking questions they should only wish away. Sundays every week with Father Montgomery, as they've gotten older they can hardly stay away.